Hiya and welcome to a early morning bleary omnivorous reader review for Whalesong, which is a novel by Robert Siegel. And I've got to say, first of all, there's the reflection, that's not helping, but that cover looks much better in real life, I think, than it does on my camera, which normally takes beautiful images of everything. The artwork is actually quite good and not anywhere near as purpley and, I don't know, new agey as it appears here. Okay, so fair enough for the new agey. This was published in the 80s, I think. Yeah, here we go. Copyright 1981 by Robert Siegel. Okay, so it's actually an exquisite coming-of-age quest-type novel. The twist to this story is, of course, that the main character is a humpback whale. So the first chapters describe the birth and early days of Hurun the whale in the tropical waters with his mother and his pod, learning to play with other whales and learning whale life. Later it talks about the migration back toward the pole and how it begins and how he learns to play with other whales at the same age. Getting to the Arctic, feeding on krill for the first time. The whole whale life cycle and cycle of the ocean is happening. The young Hurun is introduced by his father to many different types of marine animals that live near the poles, and he's taught about many aspects of the ocean. There's a lot of marine information in this book, and most of it is very good indeed. Occasionally, if you keep up with that sort of reading, you'll think, no, we know more about the marine world now. But for the most part, you can tell that Robert Siegel knew a lot about it. I've tried to research this guy. There isn't much about him. He clearly knew a lot about the ocean, and a lot about cetaceans, and a lot about the poles. So, as young Hurun is introduced to all this stuff by his father, obviously the reader learns along with him. And then a bit later, as a young bull, Hurun goes on the Lonely Cruise. The Lonely Cruise is the humpback version of Australian Aboriginal, I guess, walkabout, where the young whale leaves the pod and travels on his own for a year, maybe two. He might come back to his original pod, he might join another pod later on. I don't know if females do that. In this book, one does. I feel like, from what I've read about cetacean social behavior, I think it's the males who normally become lone bulls for a while. Anyway, leaving that aside. Within this whale culture, there are strong elements of mythology. If you weren't that interested in marine biology, I think you could actually read this perfectly adequately as a description of family life and interactions and growing into your own self. I think there's a lot here for more people than just people like myself who are fascinated by the marine environment. So the whale culture and mythology and the whole whale song, and almost, it's not quite religion and not quite deification, but there's this deeper mystic element. That's very 1980s, when New Age was big and cetaceans, there was practically a worship of cetaceans happening among New Agers. So there's an element of that, but there's also a lot more to it. It's not just a New Age book. There's a strong emphasis on whaling and negative activities of humanity from the point of view of the whales. And the whales don't actually hate them, but they find a lot of their behavior senseless. And of course, they're terrified of whalers who can devastate and kill off an entire pod. In the 80s, of course, sentiment against whaling was very much starting to become more prevalent. I would be surprised if the author didn't intend this book to make people think about whaling and turn against it, and if that was what he was on about, well done, Robert Siegel. I hope it worked to some degree. There are still whalers around the Antarctic, and I won't get into that right now. So, among other things we learn on his lonely cruise, Hurun describes various things that happen at sea, coral atolls, typhoon. I think it's meant to be a typhoon. And they're well described. They're first described from the whale's point of view, and later on the author slips into the book what we were actually looking at, so that for someone who doesn't pick it up on their own, they can go, oh, that's what it was. Toward the end, Harun finds himself looking for an aquarium. He's heard these stories about a place where dolphins and a whale are kept captive, and he wants to find it. He does eventually find it. And Harun then teams up with a fin whale who's a captive to release the captives. They do it in an interesting way. The whale on the inside and Harun on the outside take turns bashing the bottom of a net where it's rusting against the sea bottom. I don't know. I feel like I once heard a story of a whale. Maybe, I'm not sure they succeeded, but they were trying to do that. So it could be that the author got that from a real event. I'm thinking it might have had to do with orca capture. There is an orca in that aquarium that is released as well. Anyway, having reached the aquarium, Harun discovers to his horror that one of the captives is actually a young humpback who was his podmate as a child. As a calf, that would be, sorry. And upon a successful but very exciting release of all the captives, Harun and this whale become mates and continue on to the rest of their journey. I won't really go into it too much more. It's not a huge book. It's 140 pages. It's sort of standard fantasy and sci-fi of its era length. It wasn't a fast read for me, despite being a small book, because it was so beautiful. And this book is beautiful. It contains some great descriptions of oceans and things that live in oceans, the life, the seasons. Occasionally you'll catch something by the author and you go, I'm not sure that's right. For example, I've swum and done a lot of scuba diving in tropical waters. You don't see it as being green. He describes tropical waters as being green. I feel like he was more familiar with temperate ones. Tropics don't tend to be. In my experience, anyway. I'm still uncertain whether he's talking about the northern or southern hemisphere here. His description of fin whales make me think that maybe he's talking northern hemisphere. I'm pretty sure that there's a humpback population that do feed in the northern hemisphere. I'm most familiar, of course, with the southern hemisphere ones, which feed in Antarctica. I'm inclined toward the Antarctic theory due to based on the whalers and the description of the krill fields and the ice fields. But yeah, I've still not really got any idea. And if anyone does have an idea, I'd love to hear. Is this a southern ocean humpback whale population or a northern ocean humpback whale population? These big questions that I had from this book, right? Anyway, so the book is beautifully written, great descriptions of the ocean, but as well as being lyrical, gorgeously written, and very, very literate, this book contains so many references to novels on the marine theme. Novels, songs, stories, anecdotes. There's so many. I'm sure I didn't pick up them all. So, a great book. It is a great book. But what is it not? First of all, it is not sci-fi. It is not fantasy and fantasy sci-fi even. It is just not any kind of science fiction. And so, with this beautiful cover, like I said, the artwork is a bit woo-woo with all that purple, but not as much as it looks on this image. It looks better in person. Berkeley Publishing did a good job with the artwork. I wish they'd have acknowledged the artist, but I don't think they did that in those days. What they didn't do as well, however, is right under the title, you'll see it saying, I hope you will see it saying, a novel by Robert Siegel, author of Alpha Centauri. Don't know if you can see that too well, but I can. I certainly can. And that's why I bought this book. Author of Alpha Centauri sounds sci-fi. And it's very, very much not sci-fi. The other thing that Berkeley Publishing didn't do too well with is the quote by Madeleine d'Engle at the bottom. Now, I don't know if you can see that either, but what it says is, a book which is born a classic by Madeleine d'Engle, author of A Wrinkle in Time. A Wrinkle in Time has maintained, I think, some of its recognition that it had back when it was written, and it was recently made into a movie. That probably helped. But Madeleine d'Engle may not be the best promoter of this book, because when she wrote anything about the ocean and dolphins, it was full-on cetacean worship, woo woo woo, new age, and it wasn't good. Wrinkle in Time was good, the other stuff wasn't. So between the author of Alpha Centauri and the woo, it's like the publishers had no idea what they had on their hands and didn't know how to promote it. Who will sing it when they are gone? Whalesong. What were they trying to do? Between the who will they sing it? Are they trying to say that this is trying to raise awareness of the fact that the whales are being whaled to extinction? Maybe. Maybe they just thought it sounded like a good catchline. The Alpha Centauri, it's not sci-fi. Why the hell put that on there? Madeleine d'Engle. It's like no relevance. No relevance at all. So yes, I just think the publisher was really confused and didn't know what to do with it. I'm going to give you the back cover again. That wraparound artwork. It doesn't go over the spine, but yeah, still. Make a great poster, it would. Without the Madeleine d'Engle quote. The other thing that it isn't, and I've seen it called a lot, is, to my way of thinking, this is not a children's book. I know it won awards, and Wikipedia is calling it a children's book. I think Goodreads is as well. And I'm not saying that children wouldn't enjoy it. A lot of children who like animals and the ocean would. In the same way that a lot of children absolutely adore Jack London's Fang and White Fang and Call of the Wild. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily best for children. There's no way that a child's going to get even a quarter of the literary references that I got from this, and I don't think I got them all. And the writing is beautiful, so I think this is literature. I don't know how it ended up being pigeonholed as children's. Again, quite possibly publishers just didn't know what to do with it. But it won awards as that. If this convinced the children of the 80s not to support whaling, then hooray, go you, Robert Siegel. Apparently this is a one of three, something that I didn't realise until after I'd read it. And it was trying to figure out who Robert Siegel was. I figure he must have some sort of link with marine biology, but I couldn't find it. Okay. Also, this book or the publisher at least, does this book many disservices. So I ended up picking up this book and loving it. But I think a lot of people will pick it up based on the quote, the reference to his previous work, or that weird title up the top, or maybe even the woo cover. I think a lot of people will come to this book and end up disappointed purely from expectations that haven't been met. I picked this book up because I'd just finished an absolutely magnificent book by David Brin, which I've also reviewed, Star Tide Rising. Pure sci-fi, though you could argue space opera, set on a different world, which is a water world, and had dolphins that have been raised up to sentience. And I found it very difficult to settle after that book. You know how you read the perfect book? It is so good and so satisfying in so many ways that your next book, you're worried. You know, whatever you pick up is going to be unfairly judged against the previous really spectacular reading experience. What are you going to do? You can completely change your reading tactic, and I tried that. I tried picking up a young adult book. But after the extremely adept adult writing of David Brin, I just couldn't keep going with that one. And then I picked up this one, expecting marine science fiction, because, you know, author of Alpha Centauri, right? Wrong. And yet, I enjoyed it thoroughly. In terms of the lyric writing that it has, I actually found myself comparing it most to Tender is the Night, which had beautiful descriptiveness to it. More so than perhaps to Jack London, which I've also compared it to, because while there is a brutality to life at sea, and there's certainly a brutality to the whales, this one tends to be a little bit more on the gentler scale, which I guess is why you might think children would enjoy it. I don't know how much first love and first mating of whales is a child theme, but sure. If they're omnivorous reading children, then sure, they can do it. So yeah, overall, great book, 5 stars easily. Hanging on to it, will reread it. Love the marine theme. Don't really approve of what the publisher did trying to promote it, which might be why I'd never heard of it at all until I happened to pick it up on a op shop book extravaganza. What's the word I'm looking for? Not extravaganza. Book haul, that's it. My huge November book haul. This is one of them. Great find, great book haul. On to the next book. And you too, read good books. If you have heard of Robert Siegel, I really, really want to know what the rest of the books are like. And I'd really love to know if he was a marine biologist or married to one or something.